Thank you, Fran. That was a really interesting conversation, and I love Tyson's suggestion to make Tech and Trade the next Coal and Steel. And you're right to talk about the Tech and Trade Council. We here are providing a platform to shape this common understanding, to shape these norms together on technology, on digital, on all these issues. Even when we disagree, at least we can, I think, be open about these differences and have these important conversations, because shaping a transatlantic digital policy agenda will be one of the most transformative areas of cooperation. And it carries real world implications for economies, our governments, and our societies. Amid this rapid and exponential change, addressing new challenges to liberal democracy, the rule of law, freedom of expression, media freedom, and other fundamental democratic principles is an urgent challenge for the US and the EU to tackle together. Digital technologies both heighten these concerns and offer solutions to restoring the fundamentals of our democracy. But how do we balance the management of digital technologies and social platforms when we approach these issues from a different historical and cultural perspectives, as we just saw in the last conversation? How do these decisions impact democratic norms, and what examples do we set when we determine these policies? What is the relationship between vibrant and resilient democracy at home, and how the United States and the EU can better work together to uphold our democratic values abroad? To explore those questions, we turn now to a dialogue between Commission Vice President for Values and Transparency, Věra Jourová, who has been one of the most outspoken voices in the European Union about these issues, and US Senator Chris Murphy.
Hello, I'm Fran Burwell, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Welcome everyone to this session of the EU-US Future Forum, organized by the Atlantic Council in cooperation with the delegation of the European Union to the United States. I'm delighted to welcome Vice President Věra Jourová of the European Commission, who holds the Values and Transparency portfolio, and Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut and a leader in the Foreign Relations Committee, to join us for this discussion on how the United States and the European Union can work together in promoting and strengthening democracy both home and abroad. I'd like to start by asking you both to focus for the moment on our democracies at home. What is the single most significant challenge that we face in preserving and strengthening our systems of government and the values on which they rest? In your view, are these challenges shared between the United States and Europe, or are our situations distinct? Madam Vice President, let me turn to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fran, and thank you once again for inviting me. Well, I think that we share the same challenges. There are so many similarities, so we see in good and in bad. What is the biggest challenge? If I put it simply, it is the lack of trust of the people that democracy delivers good enough or sufficiently the benefits for them. We hear it from the citizens in the EU that they expect democracy and this our way of governing, that it will deliver justice and security. And now in COVID time and after COVID, they will expect that our system will deliver some kind of prosperity, or at least the lack of poverty. And these are the challenges we face. So we have to deserve the trust of people in the system. And I was listening to your speech, Mr. Murphy, Senator in the Senate, when you spoke about the attempt to overturn the 2020 elections. And you said, among other things, two important things: democracy is fragile, and then democracy comes first. And we see the gap, because when we realize that we have existential need to strengthen democracy, and at the same time we see that it's fragile, there is plenty of work on both sides of the Atlantic to convince the people that democracy can deliver a reasonably good life. In Europe, when I look at the statistics, between 15 to 20% of people have a tendency to believe the populists and nationalists so those who kind of reject democratic system, up to 40% in some member states, we hear from the people that they have doubts whether democracy is helping them to have a good life. We have to work. We have to work hard because democracy cannot defend itself. This is not the gift forever. And it is a big wake-up call. Also, what we saw in the US in January, of course, it was a lesson for Europeans, for us. Because we also, as I said, we have our problems. We have recent history which was full of blood and full of millions of victims of the wars. And we really need to keep the society stable. And I don't know any better system than democratic system where people are heard and when they have a chance to have the free cast in the elections.
Senator Murphy, trust of the people, is that the main issue, or is there another one you'd identify?
Well, I think Vice President Jourová has it right. Ultimately, what we lack is legitimacy. People in the United States are suffering. Almost half of Americans, by one study, don't have enough money in the bank to be able to fix their car if it breaks down or pay for a medical emergency that costs more than $400. That shows you how much crisis exists in this country. Meanwhile, during the pandemic, American billionaires have added $1 trillion to their net worth. People look at that and wonder what the heck government is doing. And so the reason why President Biden is so focused on sort of major transformational pieces of legislation, whether it be cash benefits to people who have been hurt by the pandemic or this new infrastructure bill, is because he believes that in order to allow democracy to survive, government has to start producing. Small incremental fixes don't work when half the population is in desperate economic straits. So I think that is undoubtedly it looks a little bit different on each side of the Atlantic, but I share that belief. I would just add, two threats. One is the problem we have where Americans don't share the same set of facts and information. Increasingly, the way in which people get their information and their news comes from partisan sources that tell them what they want to believe. And so it's harder now to have a discussion in which we're all operating off the same set of numbers. That makes democracy difficult. When one set of people believes one truth, the other believes a different truth. And then lastly, maybe an issue that's more particular to the United States, the influence of dark money. The fact that today in the United States, billionaires can impact elections without anybody knowing. Major corporations can spend huge amounts of money behind an agenda without any transparency. That corrupts our politics. And that, I think, is a little bit more of an American problem, but it certainly undermines democracy in a very significant way.
Vice President Jourová, I'd like to turn to you to kind of follow up on some of those questions, because you are spearheading the development of the EU's Democracy Action Plan. And I wondered if, in talking about some of the issues that Senator Murphy raised, political advertising, for example, and the different facts that our different partisan politics bring to light, I wondered if you could speak a bit about the Democracy Action Plan and the legislation you intend coming up. What, if you had to pick two things in that would be shared across the Atlantic, what would they be?
Yes, our Democracy Action Plan is a lot about protecting elections and protecting elections against such things like disinformation and dirty money, which is influencing the autonomous vote or the voting preferences of the people. So I think that we could provide this action plan as maybe, I don't know if universal plan, which might be applied in the United States. I would never say that there should be some copy-paste, but what we are focusing on in this plan is the protection of elections against cyber threats and cybersecurity threats, against abuse of private data of people, against disinformation, and against the very harmful marketing methods which are used in online campaigning. And this is where we are now, because we are preparing the legislation to be adopted by the end of this year, the special regime for online political campaigning. And this is the plan which is stemming from broader action of the EU towards the digital platforms, because we want them to do more, to be more transparent, more responsible, to take down illegal content, which is hate speech, extremism, which is child pornography and terrorist content, and to do more against disinformation, which is not illegal, but harmful. And here we are extremely careful not to enter the territory of some kind of censorship. The freedom of speech has priority in the EU. And you know, I come from Eastern Europe. I lived half of my life in the regime where we had just one official doctrine. And everybody who deviated from the doctrine could be put in prison or who was persecuted. So I have this instinct that we must not go far to establish some kind of censorship. But we have to do more, and we have to set some rules. Also, the reaction of the platforms after the attack on Capitol were quite telling. These were managerial decisions of Facebook and Twitter and others. And we said they could not probably act otherwise, but we want this to be predictable, what will happen in some situations, yeah? And it was an obvious example of the illustration, who can switch whom off, that the boss of Facebook can switch off the standing American president, yeah? So this is the protection of elections, also by means of doing more against disinformation, also cutting them, the producers of disinformation, off of the money, and empowering media. Because I think the phenomenon of disinformation, that it is influencing us, is also illustration of the lack of, if I may say, hunger for the truth. And the media, good professional media, play the role to provide the people with facts, with objective news, with the truth which is based on evidence. And so we want to empower media also by means of different funding programs, also by means of legislation. I know, Fran, you wanted a short answer, so I will stop here, although I have too many other things to say.
Senator Murphy, let me follow up with you on some of these issues. We've just had a very divisive election campaign and post-election process. What do you think we need to do to reinforce the legitimacy of our process? Do you see any legislative response to the January attack on the Capitol? And let me also, because the Vice President raised this, you've done a lot of work on disinformation and on support for the media, both at home and abroad. If you could speak to that and to some of the things she said about that, that would be great.
Well, listen, the first and most important response to what happened on January 6th is to hold individuals accountable. And I think that send a very strong message that if you engage in any violent behavior towards your government, just like when you engage in violent behavior towards your fellow citizens, the weight of the law enforcement system is going to come down on you. I think I would in part refer back to a prior answer. I mean, I do think that people's frustration with government today is due to the fact that they don't believe it's delivering. I think Donald Trump's popularity was due to the fact that he was the candidate sort of most likely in people's minds to set the existing system on fire and rebuild it from scratch. And that's what many people in this country want. They see the elites having corrupted American government, and they want something fundamentally different. So if we don't respond with major change, if we don't respond by significantly changing the balance of power, then I think we will be perpetually under threat with respect to very unstable behaviors like we saw on the 6th. Yes, I've been very focused on this question of misinformation. I think here in the United States, we have to have a laser-like focus on foreign influence, and we need to have transparency. Right now, if you put a political advertisement on TV, you have to disclose who paid for it. Now, many of the groups that whose names are attached to these ads are shadowy, are very friendly sounding. No one can find out who supports them, but at least you can go on a mission to try to find out who the group is. If there's an advertisement online, there's no similar requirement that that advertisement be disclosed with respect to its sources. And I think it's also important to understand that while we sort of view misinformation often through the prism of elections, it's happening all the time here. The Russians, for instance, are constantly using their bot farms to just try to stimulate divisiveness in our politics. So, for instance, we had a controversy years ago. A football player, Colin Kaepernick, kneeled down for the national anthem to protest the state of race relations in the country. The majority of traffic online about that incident was driven by Russians, not by Americans. But if you looked at our dialogue, it appeared as if this was dominating our conversation. It likely wasn't. It was being driven by outside forces. And so that's a responsibility of the federal government, of the platforms themselves, to be much more vigilant and to make sure that there's full transparency about who is actually spreading messages inside the American political debate.
Let me ask you both, because you've raised the topic of platforms and social media. We have been, I would say, blessed to have some of these companies now, because during COVID, that's how we've been able to live and work and connect with each other. We're talking today from our 3 separate offices because of that. But digital technologies have also been instrumental in spreading disinformation and connecting extremists, etc. How do you see them in the future contributing to democracy, and what needs to happen to make that a positive contribution? Madam Jourová, Vice President.
Yeah, it will sound strange from the European regulator or legislator, where Europe is now seen as the continent which is heavily regulating the digital sphere. Also, I have to mention GDPR, which was my piece of legislation in the previous mandate. But I think that we have to recognize the positive role of the online space. We see it now in COVID. It helps us to keep working and keep doing things. And we want them to, of course, do their business, but we want them to abide by the rules, because it has to be law to determine what's possible, what's not. We have over-regulated offline world, hardly anything online. And especially for illegal content, we have a mantra that what is illegal offline has to be also illegal or recognized as illegal online. It's not a space of impunity or some vacuum for the law. So this is what we want to achieve by the regulation. I think that our regulation is rather proportionate. We only regulate to the extent what is necessary. As the senator said, we need more transparency to know what's going on. That's why before we have the Digital Services Act, which is our main piece of legislation, before we have this fully enforced, before it will work in practice, we will continue the so-called code of practice against disinformation with the biggest platforms. The platforms committed, beside other things, to deliver or to provide more data so that we know what's happening. Also concerning the origins of the disinformation. Yeah, because we have to achieve the situation when we will see the producers of the disinformation, to achieve the traceability of them and to be able to address the issue. And regarding the foreign influence, we openly said already last year in February that it is mainly Russia and China, which is heavily influencing the life in Europe by means of disinformation. And we have created a network of the experts in all the member states to switch on the rapid alert system in case we see some disinformation attack, which might cause very big harm to the society. And we are considering introducing sanctions against the foreign producers of disinformation. This is where we are now. And of course, we have to recognize the power of disinformation, which we define as coordinated disinformation produced or designed in a targeted way with a clear intention to do harm to the society. And so this is the definition also we keep now in COVID time. We have an agreement with the platforms that they are taking down the kind of disinformation which is manifestly or potentially causing harm to health and lives of people. So this is what we are doing now, and I can say the platforms are cooperating relatively well, and we cannot achieve what we need to achieve without them. That's the reality of today.
Senator Murphy, there's a lot going on up on the Hill, a lot of discussion. How do you see social media contributing in the future to democracy?
Well, listen, I think there's much more we can do. I mentioned, one step we could take to have greater disclosure of paid messaging, but I also think there's a limit to what can be achieved through regulation. Much of our problem in the United States is the algorithms that these social media entities use to filter information. These algorithms end up just spinning out information that confirms your existing bias, and often that information is wrong. It's difficult, I think, for regulation to delineate between sort of what is truth versus fiction versus political spin. These companies are going to have to decide that they have a social responsibility to provide their users with a more diverse set of views. Second, there are sometimes unintended consequences behind the private sector decisions that these companies make to try to insulate themselves from criticism. For instance, in the United States, Facebook decided that they just weren't going to allow any political advertising. Instead of disclosing who did it, they just were going to not allow any of it. Well, that sounds like it's a responsible decision, but our politics are such today that social media companies are the way in which many sort of candidates who have never run for office before end up gaining supporters and raising money for their campaigns. And so if you don't have the ability to run advertisements on Facebook or Google, it's very hard for somebody that isn't individually wealthy to be able to raise money to compete. So it's a very complicated ecosystem. There is space for regulation, but many of the decisions are going to have to be made by the companies themselves. They're going to have to decide that they want to be part of the solution, and thus far in the United States, they have not.
Let me shift for our very last question here, and let me come to you, Senator Murphy, first. President Biden has said that he's going to convene a summit of democracies sometime during this year. What would you like to see come out of that summit of democracies?
Well, listen, I think the very existence of This meeting will send a signal that there's a unity of purpose amongst democracies and embolden democratic movements and reform communities in countries where the space for political dissent is narrowing. I hope that we understand that we have an economic interest as well as an interest in good governance that we share together. The Chinese, for instance, are perfecting an economic model in which they use their closed economy, made possible only because of their system of government, to midwife a technology, and then to be able to export it to the world at a cost that often we can't compete with. So as democracies, yes, we need to be talking about how to strengthen the right of political dissent, how to combat misinformation, how to make sure that more people have access to the ballot box. But we also have to have an understanding that our economies being linked together in a strategic way ultimately allows us to make the case to our people that democracy can deliver for you. Because right now, China can make the case that they are continuing to spend more people in the middle class at a higher rate than many democracies are. That becomes their advertisement. We need to join together and have our own conversation about how to lift our citizenry up together as a mechanism to defend the ability of democracy to deliver real economic mobility.
Madam Vice President, the last word. What would you like to see from the Summit of Democracies?
Well, I think that this is a great idea. We need to come back to show to the rest of the world that we are together on the same page with the universal values and with the conviction that we have to promote them. And I come back to your first question, whether there are similarities. I think that the EU and the US are both preoccupied by the current degradation of the state of democracy in the world, and we share the objective of renewing of democracies through cooperation with allies and incentivizing adherence to democratic values. So this is a very good chance for a new start, and I am really looking forward to be part of it, because we have already made first contacts with the administration, and there are big plans. There are already some concrete topics on the table which should be covered. Definitely there will be interesting debates about where we are with the digital democracy or democratic digital world, whether we are there or not, whether we can do more together. I'm sure we can, and I'm sure we have to talk about that and also make it clear to the rest of the world.
Senator Murphy, Vice President Jourová, let me thank you for this fascinating conversation. It's been a pleasure to moderate, and many thanks for joining us at the EU-US Future Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.